Greetings, Kerbonauts. This is Kerbal Space Program. I'm Bob Fitch, and this is episode number 8 of Project Alexandria, the look at the history of spaceflight using real solar system and true replicas. Today I am bringing you the continuation of 1961. We left off last episode in the middle of the year. Yuri Gagarin from Klushino went into space representing the country of the Soviet Union, the first human being to cross the Kármán line. But today we're back in the United States. It's the 5th of May, 1961. We're at Cape Canaveral at Launch Complex number 5. And sitting atop the Freedom 7 is Alan B. Shepard. This is Mercury-Redstone 3. If you remember from a previous episode, Mercury-Redstone 2 is what carried Ham, our chimpanzee, into space, paving the way by proving that it was possible to go up and come back and survive it. But first, what was it like on the road to this point? Well, you don't just toss a guy on the end of a missile and hope for the best. No, there was testing and more testing of every component of the craft, like these retro rockets or the impact tolerance of the capsule when it would splash down. It all really started in 1959 with the newly created NASA. 110 top pilots across the country were invited to volunteer for the Mercury program. Ironically, the first American in space had not received an invitation. NASA misplaced it. He was disappointed to find out he had not been invited, but later NASA realized the mistake and fixed it. He received his invitation, and of course he volunteered. You can see here some of the rigorous testing the candidates were put through, like simulated zero-G, centrifuge tests for high Gs, attitude control jet simulations, and much more. Those 110 candidates were whittled down to the Mercury 7. Listen as Alan Shepard talks about that time.
In 1960, we'd been in training for probably 20 months or so, toward the end of 1960, early 61, when we all intuitively felt that pretty soon Bob Giroth had to make a decision as to who was going to make the first flight. When we received word that Bob wanted to see us at 5 in the afternoon one day in our office, sort of felt that perhaps he had decided. There were 7 of us then in one office. We had 7 desks around in the hangar in Langley Field. And Bob walked in, closed the door, and was very matter of fact. So he said, Shepard gets the first flight, Grissom gets the second flight, and Glenn is the backup for both of these 2 suborbital missions. Any questions? Absolute silence. He said, thank you very much, good luck, turned around and left the room. Well, there I am, looking at 6 faces looking at me, and feeling, of course, totally elated that I had won the competition, but yet almost immediately afterwards feeling sorry for my buddies, because there they were. I mean, they were trying just as hard as I was, and it was a very poignant moment because they all came over, shook my hand, and pretty soon I was the only guy left in the room.
And how close was the United States to being the first in space?
Strongly was, okay, let's put Shepard in the next one. Everything worked fine. So the thing happens again, no big deal. Shepard goes a little higher. Werner said no. He said, we want to have everything absolutely right. So we flew another unmanned mission before Gagarin flew, then his flight, and then mine. So it was really touch and go there. If we'd put me in that unmanned mission, we would have actually flown first. But it was tight.
So now it's the day of the launch. Ships are positioned all along his path to account for any sort of undershoot or overshoot of the target drop zone. Shepard is going through his last physical examination before the launch. Electrical leads are being attached to him to track his vitals as the flight progresses.
I remember driving down to the launching pad in a van which was capable of providing comfort for us, and with the pressure suit on and any last minute adjustments. And we pulled up in front of the launch pad. Of course, it was dark. The liquid oxygen was venting out from the Redstone. Searchlights all over the place. And I remember saying to myself, well, I'm not going to see this Redstone again. And you know, pilots love to go out and kick the tires. And it was sort of like reaching out and kicking the tires on the Redstone. Because I stopped and looked at it, you know, looked back and up at this beautiful rocket, and thought, well, okay, Buster, let's go and get the job done. So I sort of stopped and kicked the tires, then went on in and on with the countdown.
Roger, ready to resume the count. STE, I'm going to turn it over to Stoney. Verify. Resume the count. Okay, Stoney, take it over. Roger. 5 seconds.
3, 2, 1, ignition.
All right, lift off and the clock is started. Yes, sir, reading you loud and clear. This is Freedom 7. The fuel is go. 1.2 G, Kevin at 14 psi. Oxygen is go. Cabin pressure is holding at 5.5. Cabin holding at 5.5. Fuel is go. 2.5 G. Cabin 5.5. Oxygen is go. The main bus is 24, and the isolated battery is 29. Gravity 7 here. Fuel is go. 4G. 5.5 cabin. Oxygen go. All systems are go. All systems go.
I'm printing the times of actual event down at the bottom because my KSP time and the time of those actual events differs by a few seconds. There's a few reasons for this. One, the aerodynamics and physics are just a little bit off. Another is I've gone a bit higher than the actual flight went. And finally, it helps to just make it a little more cinematic.
Okay, switching to manual pitch. Manual pitch. This is okay. Switching to manual yaw. Okay. Yaw is okay. Switching manual roll. Roll is okay. On the periscope, what a beautiful view. Cloud cover over Florida, 3 to 4 tenths near the eastern coast. Obscures up through Hatteras. Okay, this is Freedom 7. T build up. 3, 6, 9. Okay. 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 45,000 feet now. Roger. The drogue is green at 21. The periscope is out. The drogue is out. Okay, a drogue deploy has got 70%. Auto, 90% manual. Oxygen is still okay. Turn green. Main chute is raced. Main chute is green. Main chute is coming unraced and it looks good. The main chute is good. Rate of descent is reading about 35 feet per second. Everything like condition is still good. I'm getting ready for impact. Oh, roger.
3 days later, Shepard received the NASA Distinguished Service Medal in Washington, D.C., and the space race was just getting started. Many discussions about the race were being had in the highest levels of both governments, including a memo from Kennedy to Johnson saying, "Do we have a chance of beating the Soviets by putting a laboratory into space, or a trip to the moon and back with a man? Is there any other space program which promises dramatic results in which we could win?" Johnson replied 4 days later after meeting with his staff, and in that staff meeting he went around the room saying, "We've got a terribly important decision to make. Shall we put a man on the moon?" And everybody there said yes, one by one, so Johnson said, "Thank you," and reported back to the president that America should put a man on the moon. And this led to one of the most well-known speeches in history.
I therefore ask the Congress, above and beyond the increases I have earlier requested for space activities, to provide the funds which are needed to meet the following national goals. First, I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space, and none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish. We propose to accelerate the development of the appropriate lunar spacecraft. We propose to develop alternate liquid and solid...
He continues from there, proposing millions and millions of dollars worth of spending on space projects. But while the United States was doing that, the Soviet Union was getting ready to set another milestone in space exploration. It's the 6th of August 1961 and the Vostok 2 is taking flight. German Stepanovich Titov is the cosmonaut in the passenger seat this time, and the intention of the flight is to not only go into orbit but stay there for a day. He was only 25 years old when he went to space, making him the youngest to go into space. Of course, there wasn't much competition for who's the youngest yet. Only Yuri, Shepard, and Gus Grissom have gone to space so far. Nonetheless, his age record still stands today. And if you're wondering, hey, what happened to the Grissom flight? Well, no offense to Mr. Grissom is intended, but the flight was almost identical to the Shepard flight. So rather than show the whole thing, which will only look exactly like the flight you already saw at the start of the video, I'm just going to comment on it now. As I said, it was almost a carbon copy. Grissom traveled to the same launch site as Mercury-Redstone 3 very early in the morning on the 21st of July 1961. He named his capsule Liberty Bell 7. The Mercury 7 each named their own capsules. Shepard picked Freedom 7, Grissom's was Liberty Bell 7, and the next flight will be Friendship 7. Each pilot added 7 to the end of the name because there were 7 of them, and so this way no single flight or accomplishment would be deemed greater than any other. Anyway, Grissom's flight went off without a hitch until the very end. After his capsule was in the water, he radioed the recovery helicopter to wait 5 minutes for him to record his capsule's indicator data. He used a special laminated page and a grease pencil for that, and then after that they came in for the recovery, but suddenly his escape hatch that was at sea level blew open. Normally, the pilot was supposed to egress through the top of the craft, but with the side hatch blown, water was getting into the capsule and making it too heavy for the chopper to lift. They eventually had to give up. There was considerable controversy over the hatch because engineers claimed it could not just blow open by itself, that it had to be activated manually from either the inside or outside. Grissom swore he did not open it from the inside and there was no one on the outside to do it. It seems pretty clear clear now that it was a malfunction, and NASA thought so too, or else Grissom would not have been allowed to fly again, but instead he was assigned to the prestigious first Apollo flight. Also, 2 flights later, Wally Schirra tested the explosive hatch on his own capsule after he was returned to the recovery ship, and Schirra suffered an injury to his hand that seemed unavoidable because you had to bash on that thing so hard to make it blow. But Grissom's medical report showed that no such injury to his hand existed after his exam. Grissom believed that the external switch had been damaged during re-entry or upon splashdown. Improvements were made to the hatch to prevent the same thing from happening again. But back to Vostok 2 and Titov. Titov could actually be called a pilot for this flight, unlike Yuri before him, because Titov took control of the capsule for several orbits. Also, among the interesting trivia for this flight is a dubious honor bestowed on Titov as the first human to get space sick. He vomited when trying to eat one of his assigned meals. He was also the first to sleep in space. In fact, he was the first to oversleep in space, presumably because he was still feeling space sick. He was also the first to manually take photos of Earth and even took a video of the Earth from space. Titov brought enough provisions to last long enough for the orbit to decay naturally, just in case the retro engines failed to fire, but they worked okay, and after 17 orbits he returned to Earth. Titov ejected from his capsule after re-entry and landed separately from it. That was the only way to get back safely from a Vostok mission. The capsule itself hit the ground too hard for any human occupant to survive without serious injury. The world didn't know this yet though, and the Soviets weren't telling anybody, because otherwise these flights would not have counted as space travel due to the technicality that had been established where a pilot needs to land in the ship he left the ground in, or else it doesn't count as a flight. It was later discovered that Titov had ejected, and so he reported that it was just an experiment, a test of the ejection system. You can see the radiator panels opening now, right after having extended all the comm antenna. The ground stations continued to monitor Titov as he orbited. Here's some of the film he took that I mentioned earlier, some views from space. I'm sure the Americans were jealous of his more than a day stay in space, while they had only gotten to spend about 5 minutes in space each so far. As we wait for Titov's orbits to finish, we can take a quick look at a major historical event that was indirectly related to the space race. As you remember from a previous episode, when World War II ended, there was a race to scoop up the German scientists. Remember I talked about how von Braun found a way to get himself into American hands. Many went to the United States, while some others went into the Soviet Union. This happened in and around Berlin, so afterward there was a distinct area of Berlin that was Western thinking, let's call it, and the east side of Berlin toward Russia was Eastern thinking. This made West Berlin an easy way for those who didn't want to be part of the Eastern Bloc to leave the country and head west. To stop this emigration, a wall was erected around West Berlin to prevent people from getting in, or more precisely, to prevent East Berliners from getting out. We're up to Titov's re-entry now, and as you can see, he experienced the same technical problems as Yuri Gagarin before him. The capsule's service module did not decouple properly until after re-entry forces and heating tore them apart. This made his re-entry a little rougher than it should have been. But he returned unscathed nonetheless and was met on the ground by crowds who cheered him on as a new national hero. Next up, we jump to the 27th of October, 1961. There were dozens and dozens of launches throughout 1961, and 1962 will be even more, but I need to choose the ones that I think will symbolically best represent the history of spaceflight. And for the next launch, I have chosen the Saturn I, Flight SA-1. It was the first test launch of the Saturn project that will eventually lead to men on the moon in 1969. Here's what the original launch looked like. Yes, indeed, the Apollo program had begun. This booster was huge in comparison to anything else America had tried so far. Compared to the Explorer 1 launcher, this was 3 times larger, carried 6 times as much fuel with 10 times more thrust. Instead of testing entire rockets, including the stages and engines and systems and everything, NASA had decided to test each stage separately, so this flight is just testing the lower stage. The entire thing is 55 meters tall, 6.5 meters in diameter, burning refined kerosene called RP1, and liquid oxygen, powered by 8 H1 engines delivering 6,700 kilonewtons. As I said though, we're just testing stage 1, which is just 24.5 meters tall. For this flight, it's attached to a dummy upper stage just to simulate the proper mass and aerodynamics. Water was used as ballast to get the proper mass. This will burn for 2.5 minutes before sending it to its apogee of 137 kilometers, impacting 346 kilometers downrange from the launch site into the Atlantic Ocean. It worked perfectly except for the fact it had cut out 2 seconds early. The tanks were only partially filled for this test, and the mixture wasn't quite right to make it last those extra 2 seconds. There was too much liquid oxygen, not enough kerosene, but otherwise it was perfect. Well, that'll do it for 1961. Next time on Project Alexandria, as the race continues, we'll head back to the moon, and Venus will set new records and reach new milestones. So until next time, I will see you later, Kerbinauts.